Alan, we're waiting on the Zoom. You have the link? Okay, it's in your email. If you have trouble, I'll resend it. Okay, thank you, Alan. Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, he's getting off another call. We get email.
I'm glad they have the kids involved.
We'll be starting momentarily.
Oh, it was you?
Jag med det över.
You're not up for resolution on camera right now. Pretty low res.
Alan. He's connecting in.
Okay, he said you really have to drink, and apparently with AFib, you have to especially drink more.
Okay,
No,
I didn't know that.
yeah, I didn't hear you.
Alan?
Yeah,
Okay.
okay, I'm walking upstairs.
Okay, take your time.
Rabbi, run me.
Okay.
Remount.
Terrible time. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm going to just make a few introductory remarks. Welcome to Margolin Hebrew Academy Finance Yeshiva of the South in Memphis, Tennessee. We have on one Zoom, Mr. Dershowitz, we have our boys' high school in our base medrash, and we have the girls' school also on our Zoom in our midrashah. And we are so happy and honored that you've been willing to spend some time with us this morning. Just to make a few introductory remarks, if I could, when I was in high school in the mid '80s, long time ago, when I was in Seattle, Washington, so we had the opportunity to be filmed by a news crew right after the Intifada had started, and I said something very stupid on the TV, which was published on the news, and it was ignorance. I didn't know anything about the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. And soon after that, I learned a little bit, but I was able to read the case for Israel that was really able to, which you published, you wrote, that really gave me a sense, not just a sense, gave me a deep understanding of many of the issues that are confronting our brothers and sisters in Israel and how we should think about them. And so we're going to speak about that a little more at the end, but I want to thank you at this moment for your influence in my life in helping become a more educated person. So I want to thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. That's why I wrote the book, The Case for Israel, to help educate people like you. So I'm glad that it had the impact that it had.
I'm going to turn it over now to Mr. Yaki Gold, who was instrumental in setting up today's program.
So as everyone knows, Alan Dershowitz is a great advocate for Israel. He knows the history better than anyone, but more importantly, he knows how to combat negativity. Alan, it was great. Recently, you spoke against Bernie Sanders and AOC and all these wonderful people trying to hurt Israel. And wonderful is a very negative term. And today's focus, you're talking to the students about when they go to the college campuses, the toxic environment that they might experience, and how they can be ready and armed to deal with that. So Alan, thanks, for all you do for all the Jews and specifically today for helping out the Memphis community. Thank you, Alan.
Well, I think it's very important to prepare students for college because many students, particularly students who went to Jewish day schools, where basically they didn't necessarily hear the other side of the case against Israel, are shocked when they get to college. They hear just lies, they hear exaggerations, they hear defamations, range of things, and they don't know how to deal with it. They can't get a lot of help from faculty members because faculty members are not known for their courage. There are a lot of faculty members who support Israel, but they don't do it openly. They're afraid of what the implications will be for their popularity, for their student evaluations. I saw that happen to me. I was getting the highest student evaluations at Harvard Law School. And then when I wrote my book, The Case for Israel, the evaluations went down because just a group of maybe 20 or 30 who hated the book, The Case for Israel, decided to give me 0, 0, 0, 0. My favorite was I got a 0 for knowledge of criminal law. Obviously, I think that would clearly show that it was not about criminal law. It was about punishing me for making the case for Israel. Look, I don't know what year your students are in. There must be some seniors, probably some juniors as well. And for the seniors particularly, next year is going to be a very, very, very tough year on college campuses. Intersectionality, which is this phony concept that divides the world into oppressed and oppressors, privileged and unprivileged, identity politics, where everything is based on race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, a range of other issues. Jews, of course, are considered the oppressors on college campuses. even though many Jews come from poor backgrounds. When I went to college, I was the first person in my family to go to college. I had nobody to learn from in college. But you know, today I would be regarded as an oppressor. And if you're white and if you're male, you're an oppressor. And the problem is going to be not necessarily that I worry that students who go off to college will become anti-Israel. I don't think that is likely to happen. But I think what's very likely to happen is students will lose interest in being provocative and defending Israel on campus. They will conclude that life would be easier if they just went to their dorms and had meals and joined fraternities, but stay away from Israel. You're going to lose friends. You're going to lose acquaintances. You're going to lose support from faculty members if you are perceived as pro-Israel. Now, if you just, and I think many of you have gotten a terrific education, and I hope that part of a Jewish education is courage. And I hope that you will have the courage to speak up and explain what Hamas's tactic is. They call it the CNN strategy. What they do is every few years, Hamas makes up an excuse. One year it would be General Sharon going to the Har Bayit. Another year it's stopping rocks from being thrown from the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Real estate disputes that are before the courts. So every few years, Hamas will use the excuse, will fire rockets at Israeli civilians from behind civilians in their own territories. A few years ago, I wrote a book called The Case for Moral Clarity. And the cover of the book was a cartoon. And the cartoon told it all. It showed a picture of an Israeli soldier protecting a baby carriage. He was standing in front of the baby carriage, protecting the baby. The Hamas soldier was using the baby carriage and the baby to protect him. And once people saw that cartoon, the moral clarity became very, very clear. Now, what happens, of course, is you can make the case, you can make a strong case that what Hamas is doing now is a tactic. If it bleeds, it leads. They will show pictures of dead children and dead women in order to gain support for their claims. They purposely fire the rockets from densely populated areas. By the way, the Gaza is not that densely populated. That's a myth. The Gaza Strip has large areas that are underpopulated. Gaza City is very densely populated, but they don't have to fire their rockets from Gaza City. They could fire their rockets from other areas in the Gaza Strip where Israel would not retaliate and injure or kill civilians. So it's Hamas's choice to send the rockets from the densely populated areas that results in these casualties, these civilian casualties. And you have to be also very skeptical of the numbers. You know, we hear 200 civilians have been killed and a large number of children, but children are 17, 18, and some of them are terrorists. We hear that some of them are women. Well, there's no difference between a woman and a man terrorist. And the idea that you have to refrain from taking out a woman who is sending out rockets is pure sexism and bigotry. If you're a combatant, if you're 17, if you're a woman, doesn't matter. If you're a combatant, you have forfeited your right to safety. You have become somebody who is a legitimate target for military operations. And so, people say, all right, maybe you were right about the current issue, but look at Gaza. It's an open air prison. It's terrible. And it is terrible. I've been in Gaza. It is terrible. I was in Gaza also when it was wonderful, years and years and years ago. It was a beautiful area, but people forget that Israel ended its occupation of the Gaza Strip in 2005. Every single last settler, every single soldier left. They even dug up the bodies of their relatives who had been buried in areas that were under Israeli control. And Israel left behind, when they abandoned the Gaza Strip, left behind farm implements and hothouses and a Marshall Plan that could have turned the Gaza Strip into Singapore on the Mediterranean. It has great natural resources. It's a coastal enclave. It could easily be a beautiful, economically productive area. But no, Hamas didn't want that. Hamas wanted to turn it into a terrorist base. And so all the material that are sent to Hamas for humanitarian purposes, sent by Qatar, sent by Israel, are often diverted to use in sending rockets. And no country has to permit its enemies to fire rockets. Remember, Israel didn't control the borders of Gaza in the first 2 years when it left. It only began to control the borders in a systematic way after Hamas took over and started sending rockets. Once they started sending rockets and terror tunnels, obviously Israel had to respond. The CNN strategy puts Israel into a Hobson's choice, a real bind. They could, if they really wanted to be humanitarian, they could say, no, we're not going to fire back. We're just going to absorb the rockets coming in. My cousin is the chief rabbi of Sderot. He called me the other day and told me he had just presided over the funeral of a 6-year-old boy who was in his shelter, and the rocket broke through the shelter and killed him and seriously injured his mother. And no country in the world would ever accept that, would ever say, no, we're not going to retaliate because there might be civilian casualties. And especially since the civilian casualties are a function of obviously how Hamas conducts its rockets. We have seen videos. We know it fires rockets from mosques, from UN areas, from schools, from media centers, from crowded areas of the Gaza Strip, from homes. And, when Israel bombed the high-rise building that had some media in it and almost certainly had Hamas, the person from UPI said, oh, we were lucky to get out. No. You weren't lucky to get out. Israel has a policy of warning you. You got an hour advanced warning. You were told that the building was coming down. You were given an hour to leave the building. Not a single person was injured. And yet the world seems to be more concerned about buildings than about people. There's nothing particularly special about media if the media is in an area that is being used for terrorism. A guy from UPI back in 2014, I think, indicated that Hamas would come to the UPI office and threaten them and tell them that they're going to be firing rockets from the surrounding areas. So I don't think anybody can doubt that this is what Hamas has been doing. And, you can go back to the beginning of time. But in 1938, Appeal Commission suggested two states. Israel accepted it. In 1947, 1948, the UN suggested a Jewish state and an Arab state. Israel accepted it, and all the Palestinian and Arab countries attacked them. And in 1967, when Israel won the Six-Day War, it offered to return captured territories in exchange for peace. And that was implemented in Security Council Resolution 242. I know I played a small role in that resolution because I was a law clerk for Justice Arthur Goldberg, and he was at the UN at the time writing that resolution. And so he asked me to come down to New York, work with him on it. So I know everything that happened in 242, and Israel accepted it. They said, we'll give back all the territories, no occupation, a few territorial adjustments that are necessary to achieve security, but that would in exchange for peace. And the Palestinian, Israel accepted it. The Palestinians and the Arab countries went to Khartoum, and they issued their three famous no's: no negotiation, no recognition, and no peace. And as Abi Ibn said, this is the first time in history where the winning side of a war sued for peace and the losing side made demands. And that's what they did. They made demands because right from the beginning, the Palestinians did not want a state. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem spoke to the Appeal Commission in 1937, 1938, and he said, no, we're not a people. There's no such thing as the Palestinians. We're Syrians. We don't want a state. We just don't want there to be a Jewish state. And since that time, I think in general, certainly Hamas cares more about there not being a Jewish state than they care about there being a Palestinian state. So wherever you begin the journey, whether you begin the journey in biblical times, whether you begin the journey in the 19th century, whether you look to Theodore Herzl, whether you look to David Ben-Gurion and the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, the morality is on the side of Israel. Israel always sought peace. Israel always sought a two-state solution. And the Palestinians rejected it from day one. Now they're saying, well, Israel doesn't want a two-state solution. But, when you reject the two-state solution in 1967, in 1999, 2000, 2001, when you reject the two-state solution in 2008, you're not going to get better offers. Generally, when you reject, you get worse offers. And so now the Palestinians are not going to get as good an offer as they could have had if they accepted Bill Clinton and Ehud Barak's offer of 95% of the West Bank, the entire Gaza Strip, and a unified Jerusalem with a Palestinian capital in Jerusalem, a kind of borough like Brooklyn, a borough which would have a borough president. And that would be East Jerusalem, and it would be under the control of the Palestinians. It would be democratic. Just like today in Ramallah. Ramallah is basically today a Palestinian state. I've been there on a number of occasions. And when you go to Ramallah, you see a mini state. You see a wonderful city with all kinds of high-tech electronics, fancy cars, great restaurants. I was offered lunch by the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority with my son and my friend when we went to Ramallah. It was a wonderful meal. And Ramallah is a wonderful city. It's like Jerusalem. You never see a policeman there, an Israeli policeman. You never see an Israeli soldier. It is not occupied. Ramallah is not occupied. It is self-determined. It is a small mini state. And I would think more areas could achieve that kind of semi-state status. And then you have to work hard to earn a state. But you don't get it handed to you by BDS. You don't get it handed to you by the United Nations. You don't get it handed to you by OAC You see, you don't get it handed to you by Elon Omer. You don't get it handed to you by all the other efforts that are trying to make Israel the villain in this piece. Israel is not the villain. Israel is an imperfect country, just like America is an imperfect country. It makes mistakes, and Hamas uses those mistakes as an excuse for sending rockets. Let's assume there is a real dispute about an area in East Jerusalem in which half a dozen homes were taken away, and the case is now before the Supreme Court, which may very well rule in favor of the Palestinian residents. But that's not an excuse for rockets. Let's assume Israel is wrong. Maybe the Supreme Court will say it was wrong, but that's not an excuse for killing children. That's not an excuse for killing civilians. It's not an excuse for hiding behind human shields. And so I hope there'll be a two-state solution. We're now seeing a movement toward a one-state solution, which would be absurd. It would mean that Israel, Peter Beinart has recommended that it be a one-state solution with 14 million Palestinians and 6 million Jews. That would mean that the Palestinians would control Israel's nuclear weapons. It would mean they would control Israel's army and its legal system. That's not what anybody wants. A one-state solution is absurd. Nobody wants to reconnect Pakistan and India. They broke up, and thousands of refugees were created as a result of it. And that's what happened in Israel. Refugees were created. That happens when you have wars of this kind. And the same number of Palestinians who either left or were displaced were equivalent to the number of Jews who were forced out or left from Arab countries, from Morocco to Egypt. And so there was basically a shift of population. Look, you're going to go to college. I would recommend read books that have information. Obviously, my book is one choice, but there are many other books you can read and many other podcasts you can watch. Become educated, become really educated, and learn how to fight back, learn how to respond in the marketplace of ideas. And don't let the university censor your views. Don't let them take down your views on the ground that the Palestinian students feel unsafe in the presence of Zionism. That's hokum. And I would hope that most universities would allow debate, discourse, dialogue. Some universities, it's one-sided, but in other universities, at least you can present both sides of the issue. So that's my opening statement. And I'm thrilled that many of you will be going to colleges and you will be confronting difficulties at college, but it's going to be a challenge. And the challenge is something you're up to. And I want to make one thing very clear to help you. If you're in college and you get a professor who's grading you down, if you get an administrator who is biased against Israel, call me. You can get my email from the folks who are sponsoring this. I will be there to help you because I think this is really important. So now let me have your questions and your comments. You can be critical of what I said. The Talmud is the first religious document in history ever to preserve dissenting views at a time when many other religions were burning at the stake dissenters. The Talmud was honoring dissenters and allowing their dissenting points of view to appear in the Talmud. So there is a Jewish tradition of dialogue and debate, and let's hope that that tradition continues on college campuses. So thank you, and now I'm open to your questions and comments.
Thank you, Alan. Rabbi Owen?
Hmm?
We're just gonna gather the questions here and we're gonna ask your questions, please.
Okay.
A graduate event graduation to every one of our seniors on behalf of, again, it's critical reading to be able to, you hear one speech, it's good, but you got to really absorb it, and there's always a good place. So this is more or less. From wanting to know, where can he read a presentation for the opposing view that is not, let's say, completely emotional, but
Okay.
where he can try to get anyways, he's concerned that how do we not know that we're hearing always the Jewish point of view? Maybe we're getting a biased view. How do
It's
I
a
get,
good
where do I-
question, and I have an answer. So 2 days ago, I had a wonderful debate with an Arab intellectual. Kelly's podcast long and significant arguments. I think they should be heard and listened to. So I would recommend Megyn Kelly's podcast on Israel. I think it was posted yesterday. I think that's, from what I know, that was the best presentation of the opposing point of view. You certainly Barnhart. I mean, he is just end up doing away with the state of the Jewish people. So I don't think, I mean, he's written a lot about it, but I think you'll get persuasive. I think the most important thing is to find people who support Israel's right to exist, but disagree with their policies. And that's fair. That Israel has the right to exist, but he agreed with me fundamentally on a lot of the positions I took, including some that I stated in my opening talk.
One of our students, this question is from one of our students in the Goldie Margolin School for Girls. And she asks, I'm sorry, it just came up here. I'm sorry. Just a moment. So here it is. The question is, how do you balance between not being anti-Islamic, but staying pro-Israel? From Lee.
Oh, I think that's easy. Look, I favor a two-state solution. I am pro-Palestine and pro-Israel. I am not pro-Hamas. I'm anti-Hamas, and I'm anti, Islamicist radicals and terrorists. But I support the Palestinian people. I've had dinner with Abbas. I've had dinner with other Palestinian leaders. I consider some of them my friends, and I think, and they consider me their friend. I don't think they think I'm anti-Islamicist at all. I'm not. Islam is a wonderful religion, in part, obviously borrowed from Judaism. If you look at the history of Judaism, comes first, then comes the New Testament, and then finally the Quran. They're all part of very, very similar narrative. And of course, in the Islamic tradition, Moses is a prophet of Islam, and many of the others are prophets of Islam. Abraham, because he's obviously Ishmael, was the forerunner of the Arab people. So I don't think anybody should be anti-Islam or anti-Arab or anti-Palestinian. You can be anti-Hamas, but I think you should be supportive of Palestinian aspirations for statehood.
This is from one of our faculty members. What motivated you to defend President Trump in his impeachment trial?
Okay, so I didn't vote for President Trump. I voted for Hillary Clinton. I voted for Joe Biden. I'm a liberal Democrat. I didn't support many of President Trump's policies, certainly in immigration, but I'm a constitutional lawyer. And the impeachment, the first impeachment, was so clearly unconstitutional. The Constitution provides that the only grounds for impeachment and removal are treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. It doesn't say that abuse of power or obstruction of Congress, which are vague, broad terms, are the criteria for impeachment. And so I made a strong constitutional argument. I lost a lot of friends as the result of it. I had difficulties with some of my family members. We come from a long line of Democrats. We have always voted Democrat, and I still voted Democrat, but I don't allow my political views to interfere with my constitutional views. And so I thought it was the right thing to do. My wife disagreed. My children disagreed, and my grandchildren disagreed. Well, one of them at least did. One may have not disagreed. I'm not sure. But in any event, I'm proud of what I did. I'm a lawyer. I think of myself in the tradition of John Adams, who said that the greatest accomplishment he had, he helped draft the Declaration of Independence. He was the second president of the United States. He did so many great things. And he said the thing he was most proud of was defending the people accused of the Boston Massacre. It lost him friends, it lost him colleagues, it lost him business, but he understood that the role of criminal defense lawyer is absolutely critical in protecting legal rights. And so I'm proud of what I did.
Oh, they gave me a break. First of all, I happen to be, I've already listened to that podcast with Shadi Hamid, and I would second your thing that it was a very nice debate, very informative. So it was a good place. And we actually talked about one of the 2 clients during my class this morning that you discussed with him during that debate. One of the interesting questions I've seen from our students is, why is it so accepted by such a large portion of the U.S. media to be supportive of the Palestinian side and be against Israel in these situations that we're having now, when it seems that Israel does the right thing? They send the advance warnings, they have the roof knocking, the presentation seems pretty clear. How do you account for what is perceived, at least by them, to be the overwhelming bias against Israel?
I wrote an article about exactly that. It's in The Hill, about a week ago. And the title of the article is "Why Does the Hard Left Glorify the Palestinians?" And the point I made is that the hard left doesn't seem to care about the Palestinians. They didn't say anything when 4,000 Palestinians were killed in Syria, or when many, many, many more thousands of Palestinians were killed during Black September. It's only when Jews kill Palestinians that the world seems to care. And so my view is, this is not about Palestinians. This is not about Palestine. This is about Israel. This is about Jews. This is about anti-Semitism. This is about a double standard that the media, the world, has to apply to Jews. Why? You need Sigmund Freud and others to analyze that. In fact, he did analyze it, and he didn't come to a good conclusion. But there's a very good book by Dennis Prager called "Why the Jews?" Why the Jews? And he goes back into the history of why the Jews have always been the ones who have had a double standard applied to it. So I think it's not about the Palestinians. I think it's about Israel, the nation state of the Jewish people, and Jews.
Okay, so another question we have is, how do we combat the misinformation spread? There's two specifics that were on the question. One is the claim that Israel is an apartheid state, and the other one was in reference to targeting children. So I imagine, so I said the kind of related questions, but two issues were mentioned.
Well, I fought against apartheid. I was one of the lawyers for Nelson Mandela. I went to South Africa. I know what apartheid is. Apartheid is a legal system where blacks could not vote. It was like segregation in the South. In Israel, Palestinians and Arab citizens of Israel have completely equal rights. There's no apartheid at all. There is apartheid in the region. Saudi Arabia is an apartheid state in terms of Muslims versus Christians, and in terms of men versus women, and in terms of gays. They have apartheid considerations. The same thing is true virtually of every Arab and Muslim country. But the country that least qualifies for the term apartheid is Israel, and yet it's thrown around. Black Lives Matter. I support the concept of Black Lives Matter, but I do not support the organization and its platform, because the organization and its platform have said that Israel is a genocide. That's the word coined to describe the killing of 6 million Jews. A genocidal apartheid state. That comes from Black Lives Matter platform. So I cannot associate myself with Black Lives Matters as an organization. I do associate myself with the concept that Black Lives Matter. Of course they do, and they matter greatly. And I want to make sure that we work hard to assure that the criminal justice system doesn't discriminate against Blacks in various aspects of criminal justice, and it does today. So I'm on the forefront of that fight, but not Black Lives Matter. I don't accept their platform.
Question is from Kana in the Goldie Margolin School for Girls. She asks, since both sides are full of propaganda, how do you suggest telling the difference between facts and lies?
Research. I mean, do the research. That's why I wrote my book, The Case for Israel. Remember, the book, The Case for Israel, it had the arguments made on both sides, and then it would have the data, the arguments that were made, and I think that kind of approach, always looking to research. Don't just hope that maybe your arguments will prevail. I think your arguments have to be founded in research, and that's the key. And organizations, and with us, do a good job in providing the and Camera. Stand With Us and Camera, two of my favorite organizations, and they provide lots of valid, provable information. So I would recommend, when you're going to college, subscribe to their websites.
Next question we have from the students is, what are your thoughts on the direction of the Democratic Party, its attitude and policies given the current situation in Israel and some of their membership, and how do you think it will impact future relations between the United States and Israel?
I think it's a serious problem. Right now, the vast majority of Democrats support Israel, but there are 20 or 25 that are strongly opposed to Israel, not only the Squad, but others, including a congressman from Tennessee, Cohen, who has been very anti-Israel over the years, and he ought to be held to account for that. I know he does a lot of other things that are good for the community, but on Israel, he has not been a stalwart in defending Israel.
Kind of a universal type question. All right. How much more time do you have?
I have another 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Okay.
All right, so this question is, what do you think the role is of the United States in getting involved in the issues of Israel and its relationship with the Arabs and the Palestinians? And how does it benefit US citizens?
Well, I think it benefits US citizens because US citizens have enormous benefit from Israeli intelligence, Israeli technology, Israeli weapons, and Israeli human rights. So the alliance between Israel and the United States is very strong. Also, the strongest enemy of the United States is Iran. Iran calls the United States the great Satan and Israel the small Satan. And we know that Hamas is simply a surrogate of the Iranians. So, and that was proved by the Abraham Accords, which I was honored to work on a little bit. And the notion that the Palestinians would have a veto over making peace with Israel was thrown out the window with the Abraham Accords. And so, although I didn't vote for President Trump, I strongly supported the Abraham Accords, and I strongly supported his decisions relating to Israel, moving the embassy. I was there when the embassy was moved, acknowledging the Golan Heights being part of Israel. And so I think you've got to give credit where credit is due. On the other hand, President Obama acted despicably at the end of his term when he allowed the Security Council to put forward a resolution that basically said that the Kotel, the Western Wall, the Jewish Quarter of Jerusalem, Hebrew University Access Road, Hadassah Hospital Access Road are all grievous violations of international law. It's just wrong. There's no violations of international law there, but that's what the Obama administration did, and I hope we won't see that repeated with the Biden administration. I think Biden is stronger in support of Israel, but there are people on the Democratic hard left that are now stronger than they've ever been before in terms of fomenting anti-Israel attitudes. So it's very important to fight back.
This is a question for one of the staff members. You spoke about courage and the importance of courage. How did you come to be so courageous on behalf of Israel?
I have no choice. My mother and father taught me always to stand up for the underdog. And I've been doing it all of my life. And Israel has been the underdog. And I need to speak out for Israel. I don't think it requires courage from me because I'm 82 years old. I'm at the end of my career. I no longer am teaching at Harvard. I'm still emeritus professor, but I'm retired. So I don't have anything to worry about. So I wouldn't call my stance courageous. I did show courage when I was teaching at Harvard and when there were attempts to attack Israel, and I stood up for Israel on college campuses.
Okay, next question is that there has been criticism on behalf of certainly in certain Jewish and other places as well, in President Biden's response to the current hostilities that are going on. What are your thoughts on how President Biden has handled situations, and how do you think he's doing? What do you think he should be doing?
Well, I think President Biden's doing generally a good job. I think he has defended Israel's right to self-defense. He has called for Israel to act proportionately. I think he's done a good job. If you ask me for one criticism, I would say I don't think he should have praised the Palestinian member of Congress who has a history of anti-Semitism and strong anti-Israel feelings. I think it was a mistake for him to do that, but he at the same time talked about Israel's right of self-defense. So I'm prepared to be forgiving. And let's wait and see. Let's wait and see what happens to the Iran deal. Let's wait and see what happens with the ceasefire. These are all open questions, and I want to support my president. All my life, I've always supported the president, whether I voted for the president or not. I supported Reagan. I even supported Nixon. I supported my president when they've been elected. You know, I criticize them and I oppose them, but I support them. I want to see America succeed. I want to see America be great, and so I'm standing behind President Biden. I hope he'll continue to do a good job in defending Israel.
Question, Mr. Dershowitz, one more question? We'll take
One more question, okay?
They're keep coming up with more questions, but I think this question may turn into an important question. Do you think Israel has indeed at certain times committed human rights violations and ever used unwarranted violence?
No, absolutely. Israel has the best record of human rights of any country faced with comparable threats. No country in history has ever had more compliance with the rule of law, more compliance with international law, more compliance with the right of civilians. Israel has done everything it could do. It's the only country that warns civilians that their houses are going to be blown up, so get out of the houses. No, I think Israel gets a very unfair approach from the media, from academics, and from others. I challenge anybody to come up with a country faced with threats comparable to those faced by Israel that has a better record of human rights. I also challenge anybody to come up with a country which is 73 years old and has done more in the 73 years of its existence for the world than Israel. Science, technology, literature. It's an amazing country. They resurrected a language. It's just remarkable, and people should be very proud of Israel. In fact, I've urged college students, and maybe you can take this with you when you go to college, every Friday morning at 9 o'clock, I would like to see on the college campus a 2-page color leaflet handed out. How has Israel helped you this week? What has Israel done this week that has made your life better? And I think it would be not about the war, not about fights, just how Israel has made your life better. I think that would be a very, very positive development.
Mr. Dershowitz, on behalf of Cooper Yeshiva High School for Boys and Goldie Margaret School for Girls, I want to thank you so much for all of your work on behalf of Israel.
Thank you. As you probably know, I went to yeshiva. I went to a Jewish day school. I went to Brooklyn Talmudical Academy and played basketball in Madison Square Garden for Brooklyn Talmudical Academy. So I strongly identify with Jewish day schools, and I'm very pleased to have shared my thoughts with your wonderful school.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
Gold,
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.